Have you ever sat quietly in your home and wondered, when I get older, where will I truly belong? Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, deep in your heart. For many women, especially after 60, that question becomes more real than ever. Because one day, your children start saying things like, "Mom, why don't you come live with us?" And at first, it sounds comforting. It sounds loving. It sounds like the answer to loneliness. You imagine family dinners, laughter, grandchildren running through the house, and a sense that you're still needed, still part of something. But what if I told you that what feels like love at the beginning can slowly turn into something very different? Something heavy. Something silent. Something that slowly takes pieces of you away. Today, I want to talk to you heart to heart about something many women your age are facing, but very few are willing to say out loud. The truth about living with your children in old age, and why, sometimes, it can become a quiet disaster. And more importantly, what God might be trying to teach us through it. Now, I'm not here to tell you that living with your children is always wrong. Family is a blessing. Children are a gift from God. But even blessings, when not handled with wisdom, can turn into burdens. And that's where many women find themselves, not suddenly, but slowly. Let me tell you about a woman named Dorothy. Dorothy is 81 years old. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio. A strong woman. A mother of 4. A widow who has carried more than her fair share of life's weight, and yet she still smiles when she talks about her children. A few years ago, after living alone for quite some time, her son Andrew said to her, "Mom, you shouldn't be by yourself anymore. Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." And in that moment, Dorothy felt loved. She felt chosen. She felt like all those years of sacrifice had come full circle. So she packed her things, closed the door to the home where she had built her life, and moved in with her son, his wife, and their children. At first, everything felt right. Her daughter-in-law was kind, warm, respectful. She would say, "Mom, please don't worry about anything. Just relax. You've done enough your whole life." And Dorothy believed her. She would sit in the living room, watching her grandchildren play. She would sip her tea in the mornings, feeling a quiet peace she hadn't felt in years. But slowly, things began to shift. Not in a dramatic way. Not all at once. Just little things. "Mom, could you help fold the laundry?" "Mom, would you mind watching the kids for a couple hours?" "Mom, can you start dinner? I'm running late." And of course, Dorothy said yes. Because that's what mothers do, right? We help. We give. We show up. But what started as a small favor became a daily expectation. And what was once occasional help slowly became responsibility. Before she even realized it, Dorothy wasn't just living in her son's home anymore. She was working in it. Every morning, she woke up before everyone else. Preparing breakfast. Packing lunches. Getting the children ready for school. During the day, she cleaned. She cooked. She ran errands. And in the evenings, when everyone else sat down to relax, Dorothy was still moving, still doing, still giving. And no one said, "Mom, you've done enough." No one said, "Mom, sit down. Rest." Because over time, something subtle but powerful had happened. Her role had changed. Not in words, but in expectation. She was no longer just the mother. She had become the helper. And the hardest part. No one announced it. No one meant to hurt her. But it happened anyway. And if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It doesn't feel like abuse. It doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like being slowly erased. Now, here's where we need to pause for a moment and really reflect. Because this isn't just about family dynamics. This is about something deeper. It's about identity. You see, for so many years, your identity was built around giving. Around raising children. Around putting others first. And that was beautiful. That was holy. That was part of your calling. But here's something many of us were never taught. Just because you were called to give, does not mean you are called to give forever without rest. Even God rested. Even Jesus stepped away from the crowds. So why do we feel guilty for wanting a moment of peace? Dorothy didn't question it at first. She kept going. She kept telling herself, this is what family does. This is love. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Because love, real love, does not take away your dignity. Love does not turn you into something invisible. Love does not quietly consume your life while calling it help. And this is where the first quiet conflict begins. Not the loud kind with shouting or arguments, but the silent kind. The kind where you start noticing small things that don't sit well in your spirit. Maybe it's the way your daughter-in-law speaks to you when she's stressed. Maybe it's the way your son assumes you'll always be available. Maybe it's the feeling that your presence is helpful, but not truly valued. And you don't say anything. Because you don't want to cause trouble. Because you don't want to seem ungrateful. Because you love them. But inside, something starts to tighten. And over time, that quiet discomfort becomes something heavier. Something harder to ignore. And this is where many women begin to experience the second shift. Not just in their role, but in their freedom. Because once your time is no longer your own, your life slowly stops feeling like your life. Dorothy used to enjoy simple things. She loved taking walks in the park. She loved meeting an old friend for coffee. She loved sitting by the window in the afternoon, reading her Bible and just being still. But now, there was always something to do. Always someone who needed her. Always a reason she couldn't leave. And slowly, those small, beautiful pieces of her life began to disappear. Not because she chose to give them up, but because there was no space left for them. And this is one of the most painful truths we rarely talk about. You can be surrounded by family and still feel like you've lost yourself. And that loss doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small sacrifices. Moments you say yes when you really needed to say not today. Times you put your needs aside, thinking you'll come back to them later. But later never seems to come. And as the days turn into months, something inside begins to whisper, "Is this what the rest of my life is supposed to look like?" And that question is where everything begins to change. And that question, it doesn't come with anger at first. It comes quietly, almost like a whisper you try to ignore. Dorothy tried to ignore it. She told herself she was being sensitive. She told herself she should be grateful she wasn't alone. After all, there are many women who would give anything to hear a grandchild's laughter in the next room. So she kept going. But over time, that whisper grew louder, not in sound, but in weight. Because something else was beginning to happen inside that home. Her son, Andrew, started relying on her more than he even realized. At first, it seemed harmless. He would say things like, "Mom, you're so much better with the kids than we are," or "I don't know how we'd manage without you." And those words, they felt good. They made Dorothy feel needed. But there's a difference between being needed and being depended on. Being needed comes with appreciation. Being depended on often comes with expectation. And slowly, Andrew stopped asking. He started assuming. If he and his wife wanted to go out, they didn't ask Dorothy if she was free, they just told her they'd be back later. If the children had school events, appointments, or needed rides, it became understood that Dorothy would handle it. And without anyone realizing it, the responsibility of raising that household had quietly shifted onto her shoulders. Now, I want you to pause with me for a moment and think about this, because it's important. When children grow into adults, God's design is for them to take responsibility for their own lives, to build their own homes, to carry their own burdens. But when a parent steps back into that role, not out of joy, but out of obligation, something becomes unbalanced. And that imbalance doesn't just affect the parent. It affects the child, too. Because when your children begin to rely on you too much, they stop growing in the ways they need to. They stop learning how to manage their own stress, their own responsibilities, their own family life. And without meaning to, you become the safety net they never leave. Dorothy began to see this clearly one evening. It was a Saturday. She had just finished cleaning the kitchen after a long day. Her back ached, her legs were tired, and all she wanted was to sit down for a few minutes. But before she could even rest, Andrew walked in and said casually, "Mom, we're thinking of taking a short trip next weekend. Just 4 days. You'll be okay with the kids, right?" He didn't look at her to see how she felt. He didn't ask if she had plans. He didn't even pause. Because in his mind, the answer was already yes. And in that moment, something inside Dorothy shifted. Not in anger, but in clarity. She realized this was no longer her choice. This was her role. And roles, when they are not chosen freely, can become cages. She went to bed that night, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she lay there, staring at the ceiling, asking herself a question she had been avoiding for months. When did I stop living my own life? And maybe you've asked yourself that question, too. Maybe not out loud. But in those quiet moments, when the house is still and your heart finally has space to speak. Because here's the truth many women carry silently. You can love your children deeply and still feel trapped in their lives. And that feeling often brings something else with it. Guilt. Guilt for wanting space. Guilt for feeling tired. guilt for even thinking, I want my life back. But let me tell you something gently, from the heart. That feeling is not wrong. It's not selfish. It's not ungrateful. It's human. God did not create you to disappear inside someone else's life. He did not bring you this far, through all the years, all the sacrifices, all the love you've poured out, just for you to spend your final chapters feeling invisible. There is a reason that quiet voice inside you keeps speaking. It's not rebellion. It's wisdom. Dorothy didn't act right away. Like many of us, she wrestled with it. Days went by. Then weeks. She continued doing everything she had been doing, but now she was aware. Aware of how often she was taken for granted. Aware of how little time she had for herself. Aware of the fact that no one had asked her, "Mom, what do you want?" An awareness, once it arrives, cannot be undone. It changes how you see everything. One afternoon, Dorothy was folding laundry when she heard her grandchildren laughing in the next room. She stopped for a moment and smiled. Because she loved them. She truly did. This wasn't about a lack of love. This was about a lack of balance. And that's something we need to talk about more openly. Because love without boundaries often turns into quiet suffering. And God, in His wisdom, never asked us to suffer in silence for the sake of keeping peace. He calls us to love. But He also calls us to truth. To dignity. To living a life that honors the person He created us to be. And sometimes, honoring that life means making difficult decisions. Not dramatic ones. Not angry ones. But honest ones. Dorothy began to remember the life she had imagined for herself after retirement. Simple things. Walking in the morning sunlight. Sitting with old friends, sharing stories over tea. Reading her Bible without interruption. Maybe even planting a small garden, watching something grow that didn't demand anything from her, only time and care freely given. She hadn't forgotten those dreams. She had just set them aside. For everyone else. And in doing so, she had slowly set herself aside, too. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, she opened her Bible. Her eyes fell on a passage she had read many times before, but this time it felt different. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." She read it again. And again. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to admit something she had been holding back. She was weary. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She had been carrying more than she was meant to carry. And in that quiet moment, she realized something that changed everything. She didn't have to keep living this way. Not because she didn't love her family, but because loving them should not mean losing herself. And once that truth settles into your heart, even gently, even slowly, you begin to see a different path. Not one of rejection. Not one of abandonment. But one of balance. One where love still exists, but it no longer costs you your peace. And that realization is where courage begins. And courage, at this stage of life, doesn't look loud or dramatic. It doesn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It comes quietly, in the form of a decision. A decision to finally listen to that voice inside you that has been whispering for so long. Dorothy didn't wake up one morning and suddenly become a different person. She didn't stop loving her son. She didn't stop caring about her grandchildren. What changed was how she saw herself. She began to understand that she was not just a mother. She was a woman, a child of God, a person with a life that still mattered. And that shift, as gentle as it was, gave her the strength to do something she had been afraid to do. She spoke. Not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty. One afternoon, when the house was calm, she sat down with Andrew. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her voice was soft but steady. She said, "I love you. And I love being part of your life. But I don't feel like I'm living my own life anymore." Andrew looked surprised. Because from his perspective, everything was fine. The house was running smoothly. The children were cared for. There were no arguments, no obvious problems. But that's the thing about silent suffering. It often goes unseen by the very people closest to us. Dorothy didn't accuse him. She didn't list everything she had been doing. She simply told the truth of how she felt. "I'm tired," she said. "Not just in my body, but in my heart. I need time for myself. I need space to breathe." There was a long pause. And in that pause, something important happened. For the first time, Andrew began to see his mother not just as mom, but as a person. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not a fight. Not a breakdown. Just truth, spoken with love. Now, I want to be very honest with you here, because this is where many women hesitate. You might be thinking, but what if my children don't understand? What if they get upset? What if they think I'm being selfish? Those fears are real. But let me ask you something gently. Is it more loving to stay silent and slowly lose yourself, or to speak honestly and give your family the chance to grow? Because when we stay silent, we don't just hurt ourselves. We also prevent our children from becoming who they are meant to be. Remember, God did not design families for one person to carry everything. He designed them for mutual care, mutual respect, mutual growth. And sometimes, growth only happens when something changes. For Dorothy, that change came in the form of a simple decision. A few days after that conversation, she packed a small bag. She didn't make a scene. She didn't argue. She simply said, "I'm going to spend some time back in my hometown." Her daughter-in-law was surprised. A little upset. She said things like, "But what about the kids? And we need you here." And that right there revealed the truth. Not, "We love having you here," but "We need you." And there's a difference. Dorothy listened. She understood. But she didn't change her mind. Because for the first time in a long time, she was choosing herself. Not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Out of a deep understanding that if she continued the way she had been living, she would lose something far more important than comfort. She would lose her peace. And peace is something God deeply desires for you. When Dorothy returned to her hometown, something beautiful happened. Not instantly. Not perfectly. but gradually. She woke up one morning, and there was no list of chores waiting for her. No one calling her name. No expectations pressing on her shoulders. Just quiet. And for a moment, that quiet felt unfamiliar. Almost uncomfortable. Because when you've spent so many years taking care of others, stillness can feel strange. But over time, that quiet became something else. It became freedom. She started taking walks again. Slow ones. Peaceful ones. She began reconnecting with old friends, laughing in ways she hadn't in years. She sat by her window with her Bible, not rushing, not distracted, just present. And little by little, she began to feel like herself again. Not just a mother. Not just a helper. But Dorothy. And that is something so many women long to feel again. Now, does this mean she stopped loving her family? Of course not. She still called her son. She still visited. She still showed up when she truly wanted to. But the difference was, it was now her choice. Not her obligation. And that small shift changed everything. Because love, when it is freely given, feels light. But when it is expected, it feels heavy. And God never intended for love to feel like a burden. He calls us to love with open hearts, not exhausted ones. So if you are watching this right now, and you feel that quiet heaviness in your life, if you feel like you've slowly disappeared into the needs of others, if you've been telling yourself, this is just how it has to be, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly, where am I in my own life? Not in your children's life. Not in your grandchildren's routine. But your life. Because you still have one. And it still matters. You are not done. You are not just here to serve until you are empty. You are here to live. To experience peace. To feel joy. To walk with God in a way that is personal, not rushed, not squeezed between responsibilities. And yes, to love your family. But not at the cost of losing yourself. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is create a little distance. Not to push people away, but to allow everyone, including yourself, to grow. To stand on their own. To learn, to adapt, to take responsibility. Because when everything depends on you, nothing truly changes. But when you step back, even gently, something shifts. And that shift can bring a healthier, more balanced kind of love into your family. One where you are respected. One where you are seen. One where you are not just needed, but valued. So as we come to the end of this time together, I want to leave you with this thought. God did not carry you through all these years just for you to spend the rest of your life feeling tired, overlooked, or trapped. He still has a life for you. A peaceful one. A meaningful one. A life where you can love deeply without losing yourself completely. If this message spoke to your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever struggled with finding balance in your family? You're not alone. And your story matters. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, just putting your feelings into words can bring a sense of relief you didn't even realize you needed. And if you found comfort or clarity in this message, Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel Elderly Faith Journey. We're here to walk this journey together with faith, with honesty, and with the quiet strength that comes from knowing we are never truly alone. Because no matter where you are in life right now, there is still time. Time to reclaim your peace. Time to rediscover yourself. And time to live the life God has lovingly prepared just for you.